Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hash, where we bring you the latest and greatest in crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and on the show today, we have Will Foxley and Zack, Seward, a smaller crew today than usual, but a lot of stuff to get through. So let's kick off the day by talking about something interesting that came out in Time magazine. So I'm going to throw this straight off to you, Zack.
I'll take it. Vitalik is in the Time magazine most influential list for 2021. Look at that classic Vitalik photo. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. What a guy. Ethereum founder, written up by Reddit co-founder and investor Alexis Ohanian, being recognized for his work in getting the Ethereum network to where it is today. So that's the news. A couple other semi-crypto related inclusions in the list this year, but let's focus on Vitalik. I'm going to throw this straight to Will. Interesting to see, a crypto figurehead in a fairly prominent traditional magazine ranking. What's your take on this one?
Totally. I was bummed that the article that Ohanian wrote was just so short. I mean, it wasn't very, very long at all. And I was really looking forward to him to kind of dive into it. Ohanian, of course, is like a very well-spoken tech investor and then founder as well. So he has an interesting perspective. And then he's also some sort of celebrity kind of mixed in there as well. So I always like to hear his opinions on tech topics. He was recently on a podcast, I think like the Bill Simmons podcast, talking about all things technology and like his investment strategies. And he's just like a fascinating person. So I was really hoping that he'd dive more into his relationship with Vitalik. Maybe there's not much to talk about there, but I was happy that the Times decided to pick him up as the writer for this article beat. I think Vitalik deserves it. I mean, you can put all the coin nonsense aside. He has a vision for what he wants for what the world to look like, and he's walked through with it. I think Vitalik has taken way too much hate over the last few years, and he deserves to get a nod for the creations that he's striving for. Even if none of this kind of pans out, even though this works, I think you can look at him and say like he's someone who knows what he wants and goes for it. And there's not that many people out there who are like that. Zack, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, so I definitely reached out to Ohanian just to get his comments on how this all came to pass. Apparently, like this is selected by the Time editors. They reach out, and I guess this year's format, they try to get other notable people to write about the notable people being included. Ohanian told us in an email that he got an email asking if he'd like to write a piece for Time, and he said, quote, "Hell yes, I do," and wrote that blurb as it appeared. So shout out to Alexis for talking candidly on how it all went down. But yeah, it is interesting. He kind of notes in the story, and he shared a little bit more detail in the correspondence about, he was involved in the ETH pre-sale. A ton of his NFT investments are all obviously based on Ethereum. Some of the other projects that he's invested on use Ethereum to power the services that they're providing to the market. So was a nice little blurb speaking to the influence that Vitalik has had on Ohanian's career itself. So it was cool to see it. I'll toss this to you, Naomi. I mean, what's your take, top line, on seeing Vitalik here among some of the world's more influential folks?
I think lists like these are so dumb. So number one, I love Vitalik. I think he is such an amazing person in this space. He's iconic. He is a thought leader. He has just built such incredible things, and he's so influential. These lists are just so political, and a lot of the times when these awards are handed out or when these lists are created, I mean, sometimes like the cynical part of me is like, well, that discredits them if anything. The fact that Vitalik's up there against some people that I just think haven't contributed nearly as much as Vitalik has. And also, I mean, these lists aren't necessarily all positive as well. They're not just looking at people who are really good. They're looking at influential people for better or for worse. So they've got some interesting people in there. You've got I always pronounce this correctly. Xi Jinping, is that how you pronounce it? I never know how to pronounce it. You've got Bukele in there, just some interesting choices in there. But you've also got people like Musk, other builders. So I always don't pay much attention to lists like this. I think they're pretty dumb. But at the very least, it shows me that people like Vitalik are creeping into the mainstream, and that's always going to be a plus because, as I said, he has so much to contribute, and if he can influence people, awesome. I think more people could do with being influenced by people like Vitalik rather than some of the other people on this list. But Will, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I'll take a shot back at your list argument. I think that's fair in some instances. It was like the Forbes 30 under 30 has ballooned into like 5,000 people under 30 who are kind of interesting. The Time magazine piece, though, like I think it's pretty notable to be included in it. And yes, they're not always like extremely accurate. They always get a lot of haterade for their man and woman of the year, which probably fair in some instances. And, there's probably people on this list who shouldn't be included when you're kind of stacking up the competition against each other. But I think what it does is really notable is that it brings these people into the spotlight. Vitalik wouldn't necessarily be on the mindset of like all these readers who are in the Time, but now they know who this guy is, and they're kind of introduced to this idea of decentralized organizations or decentralized currency because of that. So they do serve a purpose at some point, but I'm with you that there's a lot of stupid lists out there that just people click on it. So Zach.
I don't want to spar over lists in general, but I do want to give a little more detail on El Salvador's president being included on this list. El Salvador. So while the Vitalik blurb was highly supportive and probably in sort of the positive side of the ledger, interestingly, the blurb about Nayib Bukele was written by a journalist that had been, sort of cracked down upon by the Bukele regime. So Bukele's involvement in this list has nothing to do with the recent Bitcoin law there, but really just is there to note sort of his authoritarian tendencies in that country, which was actually interesting to see that just scanning through for the crypto notables. In addition to Bukele, Elon Musk was on there, a repeat appearance for Elon Musk. But again, not necessarily mentioning his involvement with Bitcoin this year through Tesla or with his very Doge-friendly tweets over the course of this bull run. Naomi, I'll kick it over to you though. Curious for your thoughts, and you can definitely go back in on Will if you want.
Thanks.
We're like
I really
90%
appreciate that.
aligned.
We all know I love doing that. Well, I will. I mean, Will, just to go back to what you were saying, if they're being put on this list so that people can learn about them, then it shouldn't be called the most influential list. It should be called 100 people that we want to influence you, right? So it's like this heavily curated list that if they're trying to use this to give people exposure to these people, like otherwise these people already have exposure to them, and Time is just curating a list with people that others already know about. So it's like, that's why I'm hesitant to be all gung-ho about lists like this, because there's always such a big political agenda behind all of it. I mean, with the Bukele thing that you referenced, Zach, it's interesting because it is so disparaging of him. I wouldn't say that this is completely separate from what he's done in Bitcoin. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of press start to clamp down on him the same way they clamp down on Bitcoin. Doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to be clamped down on. He is a dictator, and a lot of his the things he's done in the past are kind of dodgy. So I take issue with a lot of the Bitcoiners who kind of cheer him as this white knight coming to save us all. I don't think he's that at all. But I love the fact that El Salvador is getting into Bitcoin. I love that Bitcoin is becoming, normalized in other areas of the world. And so I am also a little bit wary of influential magazines starting to clamp down on him in order to put Bitcoin further in a bad light. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more of that. And if we have more proponents coming on board with Bitcoin, if suddenly they get smeared, or if things start to get unearthed about them, so as to try to affect the narrative of Bitcoin as well. Happened before, it's going to keep happening. But let's change track here. Let's talk about another influential person who's a thought leader and who's been saying some interesting things about Bitcoin. So Ray Dalio says that if Bitcoin is really successful, regulators will kill it. And this is something that he has said many times in the past. He's reiterating that here. Ray Dalio, obviously, he's the founder of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. And he believes that regulators will ultimately take control of Bitcoin if the cryptocurrency gains mainstream success. I don't think he's too far off the mark there. But there's a lot of questions about how this could happen and whether this would ultimately kill Bitcoin or not. Obviously, I don't think that something decentralized can be completely shut down. But I'll throw this to the group to get your take, and then I'll add my thoughts. So, Zach, I'll throw it to you to start.
Yeah, for sure. So no shade on CNBC, but Ray Dalio was on CNBC's air. They wanted to showcase that appearance. We had someone look into this yesterday and write this up, and I was like, I swear I've heard that exact same headline like 3 times, and I found like at least 2 times where Ray Dalio has said the exact same thing, and the reporter actually found 4 times in the last year where he said, "Hey, governments are going to ban this thing." So it does seem to be a preoccupation of Dalio's. He's noted as a really smart guy who thinks about markets in complex ways, and so people sort of tend to respect his viewpoints on things. I mean, he pens like long emails and has some really strong viewpoints on where things are going in the economy writ large. He also owns a little bit of Bitcoin. He told CoinDesk's consensus conference this year, which is also notable. But he's still, I think, very drawn to this idea that Bitcoin may be a victim of its own success should it continue to threaten governments in the way that it does. I think the question I want to ask is like this: what is the mechanism that he is alluding to where a government could kill Bitcoin? I think a government could make it more difficult to acquire and hold, but kill, I don't know, would that be like sort of like a quantum computing attack or just nuking all of the mines? I don't know what it would look like. So I just want to ask like the technical question. I'll toss this to Will. If a government were to kill Bitcoin, as Ray Dalio is saying is possible, what would that even look like?
Yeah, there's smart critiques of Bitcoin and there's poor ones. I think this somewhat falls in between. It's hard to understand what Ray is saying with like killing Bitcoin itself. There are ways to attack Bitcoin, and like certainly, like you brought up quantum computing, which doesn't really exist as a thing yet, but would say in 50 years it does exist, and you can somehow break the algorithm that's behind Bitcoin. That would be one way to kill it. There's already people thinking about how to protect Bitcoin in that instance. To kind of go over to like the mining side, there you could kind of clamp down like China did on Bitcoin miners and make life really uncomfortable for them to be able to mine. Well, there's other people planning to kind of work with that. And then on the like banning Bitcoin, just holding it or exchanging it, we're already seeing that the SEC and others are making it uncomfortable for people to do so on some level. But it certainly doesn't seem like there is a larger impetus from regulators and lawmakers to make that a thing across the board. I think about 17% of Americans hold Bitcoin nowadays. It's a sizable constituency, and it'd be pretty tough to go against all those people, especially when there's elections every 2 years. And there's also a lot of noted senators, congressmen, and regulators who hold Bitcoin themselves or are Bitcoin advocates. So I don't necessarily agree with him on this. I don't think regulators are going to do that. I think they might have an interest, but it's probably a little bit too late to attack it in that sense. Also, it's really uncertain what killing Bitcoin means. Like what you said, Zach, like you can't just shut down this network. That's the whole point of it. So, Naomi, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, so we should look at the history of private monies and alternative currencies, because literally the history of alternative money is the government continually shutting down anything that competes with their sovereign currency. And so the whole reason Bitcoin was created is, okay, we know the government is going to attack this. We know the government will feel threatened by this and will not want this around. How do we create something that we can withstand that? And we haven't been able to do it previously, because if you have like a physical currency, you have a counterparty. You have like a centralized entity that needs to issue this thing. It becomes very easy for a government to target that and shut it down and throw the CEO in jail or whatever. And we even had digital iterations of competing currencies before. The cypherpunks worked on a lot of different ones. And again, governments didn't like any of them. Some of them shut down just because they failed in other ways, but a lot of them were targeted by governments as well. And again, it's because we hadn't figured out this decentralized component. The Bitcoin revolution is because we finally have a money that can't be shut down. We finally have a money that is decentralized. So, that doesn't mean that the government can't target this. Before, when we had private banks issuing notes, the governments just taxed them out of existence. And, now they're trying to do it the same thing with cryptocurrencies. With, SEC is coming down hard. The IRS is coming hard. All of these regulatory agencies are finding ways to target Bitcoin, and it is going to dampen it. So they really can throttle this. They can make adoption move slower, but this is our inevitable future. The internet is moving faster and faster towards a decentralized model where there are less and less gatekeepers. We're figuring out the technology in order to decentralize all of that power in all aspects of our digital lives, and currency is definitely part of that. So yes, the government can try and attack this and it can throttle it for a while, but they're not going to kill it. And even if they do get like mainstream people saying, oh, I don't really want to touch this, even if they make institutional players say, oh, this is too risky for us as a company to hold this, if the government doesn't like it, this was popularized on the dark web. This was popularized on the fringes of society. It's going to continue to be popular there. And the more that governments put regulations in place, the more of our economy becomes dark markets, you know, the more that they say, well, you can't $100 in a startup because we consider that illegal in America. Okay, so people are just going to do that in a way that can't be shut down. And I also think that this means that privacy coins are going to become increasingly important. It may not just be Bitcoin that is our decentralized future. There are other currencies there that give us more privacy. And if the government does clamp down on this, people are going to want to keep their financial activities more private, and we'll probably start diving into all of that. So let's wrap that up there and go to a break. What's coming up after the break, Zack?
After the break, we are going to talk about Binance and its latest HQ plans. We're also going to talk about Avalanche blockchain pumping in some major incentives to its DeFi ecosystem. Stick with us. It's going to be great. All right.
Welcome back to The Hash, everyone. Let's dive into the latest things going on with Binance. This is something that we cover on the show a lot as they have faced regulatory scrutiny all over the globe. Binance has this very interesting decentralized model where they're not headquartered in any particular jurisdiction. And this is how they've sort of played out the last 4 years of their existence. But in an interview with South China Morning Post today, Binance co-founder and CEO CZ said that they're actually getting ready to apply for licenses in jurisdictions that have clearer licensing regimes. They're planning to set up camp in multiple areas, so they're not just with a jurisdiction, they're with multiple jurisdictions now in order to comply with a lot of regulatory requirements around the world. So let's dig into this and sort of the history of Binance's compliance here. There's a lot we can unpack here. Zack, I'll throw to you to start us off.
Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly new. I mean, I know that they've been sort of, this is a continuation of that, hey, we're playing by the rules now, like publicity tour that Binance has endeavored to undertake after it was reported that everyone and their mother was looking at them for potential violations of securities and money laws. So I think that we've heard this before, that they're, they want to play by the rules of the road, and they want to be regulated within at least one, one jurisdiction. So interesting to see this continue to like play out, and I think they're trying to like work out the kinks in the plan here. I mean, I always feel like it's worth bringing up the fact that like Coinbase, which is publicly listed, like ostensibly has no headquarters, and so it's interesting to see how this conversation like is playing out, sort of like under two different sets of rules. So curious to see what comes of it and where Binance ends up putting down roots. But yeah, they're still working out the kinks here, and I think we're probably gonna see that be the case for the next few months. Naomi, back to you.
Yeah, to jump on that Coinbase comparison, I think that that's really interesting because you're right. People they haven't been cracking down on Coinbase the same way that regulators have against Binance. I think that's because Coinbase has always really towed the line. They've always gone out of their way to have the right AML and the KYC compliance mechanisms in place, whereas Binance hasn't. So this is probably an example of governments arbitrarily deciding which companies they want to target, depending on how much they're appeased and how much they know. How much does the company kowtow to the government's wishes? Well, that's the extent to which we will or will not go after them. So, like, the quote from CZ is very interesting, where he says, there are very simple questions that regulators usually ask us, which our response to is kind of funny. The regulators ask us, where's your headquarters? And our response is, well, we don't have headquarters. And that doesn't go down well well with regulators. They don't know how to work with us. Sometimes they even think that we're dodgy. And so I can understand, like, if you're saying things like that to people who are mired in this archaic system where everything is physical in the physical realm and they haven't really embraced our new digital reality, this can seem weird that, well, we exist in the ether. But I think that this is the future of all companies. This is our future right now. We saw with COVID, all kinds of companies becoming decentralized, workers becoming remote. There's no reason for companies to have a physical base a lot of the time anymore. Why pay for the overhead of a physical office and all of the things that come along with that if your workers are now all over the country or all over the world? And that's increasingly what we're going to be facing in this digital landscape. I think that COVID really sped up that process, but we were already heading towards a very decentralized organization of, companies and societies. So the fact that regulators are having a hard time wrapping their head around this, well, they better speed up pretty fast. And it's a shame that Binance is kind of bearing the brunt of this, because as I said, I think there are definitely ulterior motives. It's not necessarily that they're not headquartered anywhere, it's that the governments have had a hard time controlling them because of this. But this is the future, and governments really need to understand that the tables have started to turn with this decentralized ethos. But Will, I think I saw your hand go up, but I also think I saw Zack, so fight it out.
Really quick, my 2 cents, give it back to Zack. Interesting that you brought up the Coinbase comparison. Coinbase is willing to play by the rules, and then they can kind of pretend not to have a HQ wherever. It doesn't matter to the U.S. government as long as they're operating by U.S. laws. And you can say your headquarters doesn't exist. Who cares? Binance doesn't really have an HQ, they're saying, but they're not going by anyone's rule book. And now everyone is concerned about it. So, it's pretty obvious which way you have to play. You have to play towards Coinbase's advantage here, or the U.S. government's advantage here. Zack, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you guys are right. I think it's definitely not apples to apples comparison, and my bad for suggesting that it was. But yeah, I think it is a bit different. Binance historically has played fast and loose with regulations. Coinbase historically has spent the money and the time to lean into the compliance aspect. So the fact that we are seeing two different responses to two companies that both claim to be decentralized in nature, I think makes sense in the historical context. I'll kick it back to you, Naomi, for some last thoughts.
Yeah, I won't dismiss your comparison too quickly. I think there's a lot in there, especially because Coinbase only recently considered themselves decentralized, whereas Binance from the get-go has kind of been, we're everywhere. Like, they've had a much longer history with this. And also, they mentioned in this article, it's sprawling operations with no substantial record of an operating headquarters left regulators with little to no control over it. So that's a big reason probably why Binance, first of all, decided to do this, and second of all, has been kind of playing hard and fast with all of the rules around the world. So it just goes to show you that if you do have a headquarters like Coinbase have, you have to abide by the rules of that jurisdiction, or you'll be shut down pretty quick. So Binance has enabled all kinds of things for consumers, much to the chagrin of governments around the world, because they've chosen this route. And I think consumers were better off because of it. So I'm pretty sad to see this ending, but I'm hoping that we keep pushing forward towards this decentralized future. But let's change track here. Let's talk about other interesting thing going on in the DeFi world, and the decentralized world, crypto world. Will, what have we got?
That's right. According to Andrew Thurman this morning on CoinDesk, we see that the Avalanche Foundation has just got a giant pile of cash to jumpstart liquidity on the Avalanche network for decentralized finance. So Three Arrows Capital and Polychain Capital have participated, along with CMS Holdings and Dragonfly Capital, in investing in the foundation in order to bring liquidity to this project's DeFi ecosystem. In general, DeFi has kind of lived on the Ethereum network, and it's kind of moved over to a few other places like Solana here and there. But for the most part, it's been really hard to get liquidity off of these DeFi apps quickly. And so what these other blockchains have turned towards is the VC ecosystem and the ability to jumpstart your DeFi project by injecting just millions of dollars. Why do you need to do that? Well, in order to have DeFi function at all, you need to have some base layer of financial reserves within the application itself. Otherwise, it just plainly doesn't work. That's why last summer, a lot of these Ethereum projects, when they were just bootstrapping themselves, issued tokens in order to bring people onto the gravy train. So you saw Compound with its Comp token launched their project. If you deposited stable coins or Ether, you would be compensated in comp tokens. The price of those comp tokens rose a ton over the summer, and people are pretty happy with that. They're pretty happy with their investment, which brought other people into the project itself. So interesting to see another player enter the game. Also interesting to see Three Arrows Capital, Polygon Capital, and some of these other VCs getting involved with the Avalanche network. There's a lot of other competitor layer ones out there, or layer zeros, as they're kind of coming into vogue to call themselves. And they're coming to compete with Ethereum. They're trying to take Ethereum's crown jewel, which is the DeFi ecosystem. Zach, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see these base layers sort of vie for mind share. You see these little red, those little red triangles, little red up triangle signifying the Avalanche tribe is growing on Twitter. You have the Solana little circle. I don't know what color they are, but it's like a little circle, a little O. Also another tribe that's growing in strength and might. So it's interesting to see people sort of hitch their wagons to rising stars in the space, and I think Avalanche is clearly becoming kind of one of those ones. So, the fact here that some prominent crypto investors are pumping a pretty large sum of capital into making DeFi on Avalanche a robust experience, certainly notable, and it's going to be interesting to see if smaller traders follow suit, right? Here's some big figureheads of the trading scene who think that, hey, maybe Avalanche is better than Solana for something like this. Maybe I should try it out. And I think that is what all these networks are betting on. Honestly, they're saying, hey, we have all these tokens sloshing around. Let's make as big a number as we can. I mean, we saw Hedera Hashgraph do this today to the tune of $5 billion worth of HBAR tokens as a way to again. Say that, we're committed to building this network and we think you should come try it out with us. And I think that's what these incentive programs ultimately represent at the end of the day. I don't know, a lot of momentum. There's probably some Avalanche pun that could be made capably, but I'm going to toss that one to Naomi to make it work.
I can't make it work. Will, I saw your hand up. Make that pun work.
No, I have a question for Naomi, actually. You've been in the ecosystem for years, and I'm wondering what your take is on, at this stage in the market cycle, seeing these huge paychecks going to foundations to jumpstart their other projects. Like, Avalanche is halfway through bull cycle right now, and now they're getting all this money to keep the party going. So have you seen this before, and what have been the consequences of that if you have seen it?
Yeah, it's always interesting when years and years ago you hear about these projects and then you interview people, part of them, but they're tiny and you're like, this could be something. And then years later, you see such a huge amount of money go into it and they're still going, It's always heartening, especially having gone through the terrible make your own coin era, the ICO era, different bull cycles where things are just flash in the pan, then they disappear. So it's very clear we're starting to see some projects with legs and longevity. And Emin Gunsera he's a super smart guy. I remember interviewing him years and years ago about this. So very interested to see where Avalanche heads to. It's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on, and it's also something being integrated into other projects, the Avalanche protocol itself. So definitely keeping an eye on that. But Zack, let's wrap this up.
Let's snowboard out of here, guys. Okay, thank you. Sorry, couldn't do it right, but I did it poorly. Thanks.
That's pretty good.
That's it for the show today. Welcome to the Hash. Yeah, it was pretty bad. I'm sorry. We'll be back again tomorrow. And have a good day till then. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you later.
Bye.